Okay, so today we're going to talk about something that perhaps has happened to you in your life, possibly. And that's when you look at your child and you think, where do you come from? You know, who produced this? Why can't you just think like a normal human? You ever had that experience? Yeah? Ever had a shtickle argument with your child about something that in your mind is absolutely rational and in their mind they think that you're from another planet? Yeah?
Yeah.
So that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about how do we get our kids to be on the same page as us. It might be one of the biggest challenges that we have as parents, because we have a picture, we have a set of values, we have an outcome, we have an aspiration, and then we have kids. And they just don't seem to agree with many of the things that we propose. And very often we land up bashing heads. So when kids are little, you can still invoke that I'm the parent and you're going to listen to whatever I have to say. And as they get a little bit older, and once upon a time it used to be older than it is today. So today at a relatively young age, they already start to defy and challenge and ask questions and say, who says I have to do as you think and you're so old-fashioned and don't you know what's going on in the world and that kind of thing. And then we feel completely disempowered. And what am I supposed to do? So I really wanted to start this conversation just simply by asking, what are the things that we're fighting with our kids about? And I'm not talking about the regular, the classics, you know, bedtime, you have to brush your teeth, not that kind of stuff. But I'm saying from a how are you? Baruch Hashem. You know, I'm talking more from an ideological point of view, from a values point of view. I'm just curious, like what's the stuff that we're bashing heads over? Let's start with that.
What are you watching on YouTube?
What are you watching on YouTube? That's an interesting one, by the way. That's really interesting, because if it's YouTube, you're probably still okay. It's when you start talking about Netflix. That could. I'm not saying YouTube is clean. Don't get me wrong, or safe. You know, there's a lot of stuff that they'll encounter on YouTube. But that's a great question, right? I want to scale the question back one step. Who here is still fighting with their children about whether you're allowed to watch? So you're already talking about what you're watching. Who here is still fighting about whether you're allowed to watch? Or, similar question, about whether or not you're getting a device. Yeah? That fight's happening, right? And what's the classic response you get from your kids? Everybody else has. Right? I'm the only one. I'm the only one. Now, let me just give you another scenario that perhaps you haven't yet encountered, because it depends where you are in the story. Wait until you reach the point that your younger kids tell you who's getting the device when you get your new, when you have to upgrade your contract, because their older sibling got a phone when you upgraded. So then it's logical to them that obviously they're next in line to get a phone when you upgrade next. The fact that there may be a massive difference in age between the two candidates is irrelevant. Like, it doesn't, because the line they always throw out, right? It's not fair. But basically they're saying, so-and-so got your phone when you upgraded, I'm next in line. And the reality is they are next in line, even though it's completely inappropriate. So yeah, that's a classic that we're fighting about, is anything to do with devices, technology, social media, etc. Whether you're getting the device, whether you can watch certain things, and of course, the whole question of, you're the only crazy one. You're the only crazy one. All my friends' parents allow them. And by the way, it's not so different from when we were kids, because we used to do the same thing to our parents. It just wasn't about phones and devices. It was all my other friends are allowed to play this particular computer game or go out to that event on a Saturday night, or they don't have a bedtime. Like, you're the only crazy one who makes us have a bedtime. So fundamentally, that principle of kids contesting their parents' rules, that's quite normal. But I want to specify today, I want to talk about values. About shared values. So what you watch, the content that you watch online, or whether or not you have a device, we could argue is a value. I have a certain value that I want for my children, and they don't necessarily see eye to eye on that value. So what else would fit into that category of classical arguments that we're having with our children around values?
Maybe some dress code.
Oh, there we go, dress code. Absolutely. And I would like to add that the dress code debate is not limited to frum standards. If you're in the frum world, then obviously you're invoking, that there's a frum standard of dress, and it's very easy to quantify, sleeves and, how low a neckline is and the length of a skirt and that kind of thing. But even if you're not bound, so to speak, by the frum parameters, I still think dress code is a big deal, because every parent today is worried about what their child is going to look like and what that might actually do for their engagement with others. Hello, good morning. So the question we're asking is, what are the classical debates around values that parents and kids are having in today's world? So far what we've got is the debate around devices and content, and the second so far is about dress. What is or isn't appropriate in terms of dress? What other value debates do we tend to have with our kids? I could think of a few others, by the way, that might seem a little bit too para for the conversation, but they're actually real. Okay, so let's be a little bit more specific. What does it mean, how to be a mensch? What do you mean by how to be a mensch?
They forget their manners.
So our kids... Right, our kids forget, so you've said two different things. One is that they often forget just how to be decent in their treatment of other people. And that's not because our kids are bad kids, but it sometimes just gets a little bit overlooked. And those other people sometimes include us. Forget to acknowledge that we exist, or greet us, or thank us, etc. And then the other thing that you said is to distinguish right from wrong, which is a very big topic, right? Because very often the things that we take for granted as right and wrong, the kids don't necessarily begin to think of as right and wrong. So can anybody suggest an example of something like that? Where for us, it's a line in the sand, it's absolute, you don't do this. And for the kids, let me give you an example from when we were kids that you may or may not recall. So when we were kids, there used to be the concept of your friend giving you music on a CD. Yes? Yes? Or a tape, right? In our reality, but everybody did that. Everybody did that. So you had the technology, you could copy an album, music, a video, whatever the case is. So we did it. Now our parents might have been horrified by the thought. I don't know if they were or they weren't, but they might have been horrified by the thought. So that would be an example of a completely different set of values from one generation to the other. So what would be the equivalent in our world today? Things that our kids don't even begin to realize. Of course, it's our job to educate them, but they don't naturally begin to realize that this is ethically problematic. Or morally problematic. So anything at all that comes to mind. Of course, just remember, bear in mind, we're the ones telling our kids that they must keep to those things that are required by the law, etc., unless it's not paying e-tolls, or unless it's you have to go through the red under these circumstances, right? So we've got to be careful not to be overly hypocritical about what standards we demand of our kids. But let's try and work out what is there in the ethical moral sphere that maybe our kids don't even begin to consider, things that we believe are immutable and there's nothing to discuss. Or like we tell our kids, don't lie. And then we tell them, tell so-and-so that I'm not home. Okay, so that's where we have these role model clashes that happen in our lives. But let's try and define, like, what are the things that we would take for granted that these are ethical, moral issues, and our kids would look at us with blank stares and say, I actually have no idea what you're talking about.
Making your bed.
Okay, I don't know if that's an ethical or that's a discipline issue, right? Making your own bed. Bear in mind that you're talking in the South African context. One of the great things about all the people who emigrate is that they have to make their own beds. So that's a discipline issue. I wouldn't say that that's an ethical or moral issue that we don't necessarily see eye to eye with our kids. Anything? Anything that comes to mind? Now the reason I'm asking the question, because this will be really, really important. Because if we're going to talk about values and getting our children to be on the same page as us in terms of values, a really important place to start is in terms of ethical values or moral values. So dress code would possibly fit into that realm, right? Because how do you draw the line in terms of what you consider to be fashionable and what do you consider to be inappropriate? It's not so simple. And I think content is also a similar thing. So, for example, I heard the most fascinating study that was done recently. And the study is about the rise of sadism in our society. It's a fascinating study. So, in other words, typically when we speak about people and inappropriate personality types, typically we speak about the people who are the narcissists, we speak about the people who are the sociopaths, we speak about the people who are manipulative characters. But sadistic behavior, we typically don't associate with the average person. Now let's just define for a second. What is sadistic behavior? What is sadism? It's the pleasure from the pain of others. You don't have to be the cause of the pain necessarily. So the sadist derives pleasure from the pain of others. Now, let me ask you a simple question. Have you ever watched a live, actually in the arena, have you ever watched either cage fighting or boxing or something like that? No? Good. I was hoping you would say no. Why not? You'll say, because I have absolutely no interest. That's to say. Exactly. Not only do you have no interest, it is disturbing. The thought of taking two human beings and putting them into a confined space with the intention that the one should cause grievous bodily harm to the other, and then everybody should cheer for it, should disturb us. It should disturb us. So, therefore, by extension, and of course I'm not comparing a boxing match to what goes on between our kids, but when two children lay into each other and they have a full-on fight in our own home, what's our response? Horror. Now, you could say that it's normal and it's part of development and that's how kids learn how to assert themselves, etc., etc., all that wonderful stuff on paper. When it's happening in our own home, we go crazy and we want to just pull them apart and ground them and give them all kinds of consequences, because the concept of somebody causing pain to another person is disturbing to us. And worse, if they seem to take any pleasure in that pain, that's really bad for us. We just don't resonate with that. Now, what changes when instead of actual physical infliction of pain, when it becomes virtual infliction of pain? In other words, when a kid is playing a game, and in that game the objective is to blow people's brains out. You know, it's all virtual, there's nothing real about it. Of course, it's the graphics. I remember the TV games we used to play, there were no brains. You couldn't see that level of definition in the TV games. You know, I remember there was this game called Wolfenstein. I don't know if you ever heard of Wolfenstein, which was basically you went around killing Nazis. So every Jewish kid loved that game. But you know what they looked like? They were like stick figures that ran across the screen in one color. It was a black screen and they were either green or orange, I don't remember. Like these stick figures that used to run around, and then you got rid of them, you shot them, and then they disappeared. There was no blood and guts. In today's world, there is a lot of realism in the kind of games that kids are playing online. And what does it cause them to feel? Dopamine. Pleasure. So that's why we've got this rise of sadism in our society, because that's what's giving kids a rush, is doing things that call it virtual pain to others. Plus, there's the depersonalization of it. Because when you're actually standing there pummeling somebody's face, you can't avoid but realize what you're doing. Whereas if it's in the virtual environment, it's depersonalized. So you only get the rush without actually feeling the sense of conscience. Now that translates directly, for example, into the concept of social media bullying, online bullying. It's the same principle. The kid who bullies, or the kid who creates the nasty WhatsApp group about the person who's sitting there right in front of them, because that's how our kids, they're all on their devices. So we don't know if they're chatting to somebody wherever, or they're chatting amongst themselves about somebody who's sitting in the room. We don't know, right? But there's this sense of depersonalization, so they're not completely in the environment, and they're getting the pleasure of the pain caused to somebody else, especially when you operate as a pack, because now we're all excluding this person or making fun of this person. So we all feel good, and we've got this sadistic behavior that's become part and parcel of our society. For us as parents, it's completely horrifying. And for the kids, they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. Nobody really got hurt. It was just a WhatsApp group that we spoke about. So they didn't even know about it. They're not even hurt. So we can't even have the conversation. How do you have that conversation with the kids? They don't know where we're coming from. It's more bizarre to them for us to call them out on cyberbullying than it is for our parents to have called us out on pirating CDs. Like, at least we could understand where they were coming from. There was some kind of logic to it. We're living in completely different worlds. So my question is, how do we get our children back onto the same page as we'd like them to be, at the same page as us, on moral, ethical values, when the chasm just seems to be so immense? So go back to your question about what do you watch on YouTube, or similarly, what games are you allowed to play? But all my friends do it. There'll even be those kids who turn around and say, but today, especially over COVID, that was the way our kids socialize, through Fortnite or whatever it is. That allows them social interaction. So how do we get onto this? How do we even speak the same language? How do we get onto the same page? It's a big challenge, don't you think? It's a big challenge. Now remember, the objective over here is to find wisdom in the Torah that may appear to be abstract wisdom, and then apply that wisdom in a really pragmatic way in our own lives. Last week, the focus was about the importance of being able to pivot. Because when we come up against a wall, and it's not so simple, and we don't know, what used to work doesn't seem to be working, there the challenge is fresh eyes. The challenge is fresh perspective, the ability to take a risk and try something that we hadn't tried before. Probably one of our biggest issues as people, parents specifically, and Jewish parents even more specifically, is this urgent need to get it right. And if we don't get it right, we're terrible failures. And that's probably the first thing we get wrong, is the need to get it right. We're all growing in this experience. There's nothing about it that is guaranteed, and there's nothing about it that needs to be perfect, as long as we're growing and growing together. So it's that principle, the growing and together, that's what we're going to focus on today. And to get there, I'm going to borrow a story from the parasha this week and then contrast it to another story from last week's parasha that in a certain regard may look like they're really similar stories, but they're not at all. And if we don't see the distinction between the two stories, then we'll easily fall into the trap that many of us do fall into, which is the trap of letting the values guide the family. Now, I know that sounds very controversial to say, not to allow the values to guide the family. I don't mean that we're going to make the values flexible to suit the family. But there's something else that we need in the mix, which is really, really important. And if we miss that step, the whole tower can fall down. So here are the two stories. Okay, you ready for this? Story number one. Story number one is, in this week's Torah portion, we're going to read about the story of the giving of the Torah. So the giving of the Torah obviously happens at Mount Sinai. And of course, the people who are there at the time are the Jewish people who've just left Egypt. And they are obviously very excited. Think about it. How did you feel when you finished school? Oh, I'm out. Free. I'm free. There's this tremendous release when a person's been in a confined environment, and in this case, an abusive environment. So now to be free is a tremendously exhilarating experience. So they're all in a good headspace, or in a good mood. They're very optimistic. They're looking towards the future. And the future at this point has its major watershed at Sinai, because they all know that something spectacular is going to happen at Sinai. It's so exciting for them that they count the days. They're counting the days till we get there, or as we would call it in our families, counting the sleeps. They're counting the sleeps to Sinai. So they're very focused, they're all on the same page, they're all moving in the same direction, and they arrive at Mount Sinai. And the Torah says this. So I'm going to give you the verse in Hebrew, then we're going to pick it apart and understand what it means, just as a translation, and then based on that, try and understand what it's telling us, and then we'll see how we'll probably get it wrong. So this is what it says. Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Hahar. Okay? Let's try to unpack those words. Does anybody know what the word Vayichan means? The funny thing is you probably do know what it means, you just don't know it in this form. Vayichan. Okay? Okay, so let's change the form, and then you'll see, I know exactly what it is. So Vayichan is the verb for the word machaneh. So Vayichan, and they camped. Right? Vayichan. What does the word sham mean? There. Now remember, no words in the Torah are extra. So we already know where they are, because the Torah has just told us they got to Sinai. So why does it tell us that they camped there? Who camped there? Yisrael. Okay, that's the collective noun for the Jewish people. So the Jewish people camped there, neged hahar. What's a har? A mountain, right? Neged, what does neged mean? Against or opposite. So they camped there across from the mountain. Let's make it an easier sentence. They camped there across from the mountain. So far, so good, yes? So it's describing that the Jews arrived at their destination, set up camp at the base of Sinai, and the next thing that's going to happen is they'll receive the Torah. There's one highly problematic part of that phrase. And Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Hahar, I translated it in the most comfortable way, not the most accurate way.
Is it he camped?
Exactly. Vayichan, brilliant. Vayichan is a singular word. And he camped there at the mountain. He, referring to the Jewish people, close to 3 million people, referred to as he. He camped there at the mountainside. So what do you think the message is?
To be one.
Unity. The message is unity. If I could refer to 3 million people in the singular, then surely the message is unity. Why does it say Sham, that they camped there? What's the implication?
Not here. Not so.
Everywhere else, it wasn't so united. And boy, oh boy, if you know the story of the 40 years in the desert, you know that there was a fair amount of faribel going on and complaining and moaning and grumbling. So here they were united. This is the unique there. At that moment, there was this unique sense of unity. Rashi describes that unity, Ke'ish echad belev echad. They were like one person with one heart. Isn't that a beautiful way to describe unity? Like one person with one heart. Isn't that a magnificent thing to be able to say about our families? We're like one person with one heart. But it's not so simple. Is that really what we want for our families? That we should be like one person? No, we want each person to be an individual. We want self-expression. We want them to follow their dreams. At least in theory, right? Until they start to become their own person and they start to follow their dreams, and then we panic and we say, what happened? We had this beautiful cohesive thing when all of you were small. And then they reach the point and it was like, who are you? And where did you come from? I'm sure these are not my genes. So it's nice in theory, right? Ke'ish echad, belev echad, to be like one person with one heart. It's very nice in theory. What do you think did it? What do you think made that unique experience of being so unified at Sinai?
The joy.
The joy of
Looking forward
to
to something.
The purpose.
purpose, right? So they had a purpose. What was the nature of this purpose? They didn't know the details, but they knew the nature of the purpose. What was the nature of their purpose?
They were getting something.
Values. They were going to be given a set of values called the Torah, ultimate values with a capital T, truth. That's what they were about to receive. They had come from a society that lacked values, and they saw what that could do. They saw how destructive it was and how you could manipulate other people and abuse them and enslave them. And now they were about to become the first nation ever in the history of the world who were going to have this amazing set of values that would protect them from becoming rogue people and destroying each other. So that's what they were looking forward to, and that's abandoned them altogether, right? That's the mistake we all make. That's the mistake. We all think the values are going to bring us all onto the same page. That's what we think. We believe that if you take us to Sinai and you present us with this clarity and with a sense of values, we will naturally all just come together. So that's what we believe as parents. I'm going to sit my children down and I'm going to tell them, this is what we believe. This is really important to us as a family. You know, every family, I don't know if you're into this, but some people tell you every family should have their family mission statement. So this is our family mission statement. We're going to put it on our fridge. You know, these are the things we believe in. I'm not recommending necessarily you do that, but, you know, trying to survive. But one of my kids sent me a clip the other day. It was hilarious. It's a guy who does a summary of all TED Talks. Does a summary of all TED Talks. It basically goes something like this. I don't remember the exact details, but it goes something like this. When I was young, I thought I knew everything. And then, as I grew older, I realized that there was a lot I didn't know. And then I learned. And based on what I learned, now I know a lot about something that nobody else knows anything about. It's like the summary of all TED Talks, right? So the summary of all TED Talks on parenting is make a mission statement for your family. Who's making mission statements for their family? As you say, we're trying to survive. You know what I mean? It's like, this is a war zone at times. It's a dynamic situation. You can't put a mission statement on your fridge and then think your family's fine. It doesn't work that way. So we all think we're going to put out the values and then everybody's just going to check in. Yes. Oh, parent, you are so wise. We're just going to follow you. It doesn't work that way. Never works that way. Nobody ever sets out a list of things with all the greatest lectures in the world and says this is what we believe. And the kids say, obviously, I never saw that before. Thank God I have such wise parents. That's not how it works, right? Okay, so pause that thought. We're misreading the story. That's clear. We're misreading something about the story. We have to find what we're misreading about the story. Because it is interesting that even Rashi, when he gives us this beautiful line about being like one person with one heart, does not reference the part of the verse that says that they were opposite the mountain. He leaves that out of it. He says it's not because of where they were going. It's not because of what they were looking at. It's not because of the value system that was about to enter their lives that's what brought them together. In fact, as we'll soon discover, it's actually the opposite. So let's look at the other story. There's another story in last week's parasha. What was last week's parasha? The Jews leave Egypt. And a few days down the road, Pharaoh says, oh my gosh, what did I just do? This is ridiculous. I've just destroyed my country. I've let our greatest asset go. Ridiculous. So he galvanizes his troops and they go chasing after the Jews. Listen to the verse. Vayisu Yisrael eseinehem. The Jewish people raised their eyes. By the way, parenthetically, there are a few places in the Torah where it talks about raising your eyes. I don't think the people who lived at the time of the Torah realized what it means, how hard it is to raise your eyes. In our generation, raising eyes is a big challenge, you know. Anyhow, so they raised their eyes. That's what it says. Vehine Mitzrayim nosea achareihem. Let's translate that phrase. Vehine and behold. That's a very biblical word, right? You don't say behold. Even when you're telling the values to your kids, you don't say behold, these are our values, right? So it's a very biblical word. Vehine and behold, Mitzrayim, Egypt, nosea was traveling. It's in the present tense. Nosea is traveling. Achareihem, after them. In other words, oh no, the Egyptians are coming. The Egyptians are coming. They're chasing us. Again, in that phrase, we have the same grammatical problem we had in the other one, which is nosea is a singular word. Yeah. It should have said noisim. There are 600 chariots of Egypt coming after them, and who knows how many foot soldiers. It should say nosim in the plural, but it says nosea in the singular. So Rashi again tells us why. Listen to what he says. Belev echad keish echad. With one heart, like one person. Okay, so at Sinai, he says the people are like one person with one heart. When the Egyptians are chasing the Jews, he describes it as one heart like one person. What's the difference? So let's think for a moment. What is the role of the heart in human experience, besides obviously the mechanical, physical heart that keeps us alive? But conceptually, the heart is the seat of love, not only love. The heart is the seat of emotion. Not all emotion is love. Think about it. When a person's angry, which organ tells you what it feels like to be angry? Your heart. Your heart rate goes up. When a person is sad, which organ tells you that you're sad? Your heart. Your heart feels sore. So it's not only love that is expressed, not all of emotion is expressed through the heart. Now what's unique about emotion? It is totally unpredictable. That's emotion. It's completely unpredictable. So for example, I'll give you an example. I don't know if anybody here could relate. The person who comes home from Santon City with a handbag, and the person's husband says, why do you need another handbag? Because obviously in the male brain, it's either got utility or it doesn't have utility. Like, what would be the point? There are X amount of handbags already in your cupboard. Why do you need another one? And the response is, when I saw it, I just felt I needed it. Or I just felt I just loved it as soon as I saw it. That's an emotional response. Unpredictable. You didn't know it was going to happen. You don't go to Santon City with the intention of buying a new handbag. You went to Santon City because you needed to get X and Y groceries. But it's unpredictable. In the same way as the person who says, I'm not going to lose it with my kids today. I'm not going to lose it with my kids today. I'm going to be calm with my kids today. And then, that's dafka the day that the kids will do something that elicits an unpredictable response. I never knew I could be this ogre. So that's the nature of emotion. Emotion is unpredictable. Meaning to say you can't really plan for emotion. So, again, an example you won't be able to relate to necessarily, a soccer game. Have you ever watched soccer fans watching a soccer match? It is hilarious to the objective, sane mind. It is.
It's like almost more reason to watch it.
No, the only time I ever, and it's really few and far between, I have a minhag. My minhag is that I bring the community together to watch the World Cup soccer final once every, 4 years, right? I bring everybody together. It's an absolute pleasure. I don't know who's playing. I don't care who's playing. But at least it's a community event. Everybody has a good time. This year it was on Hanukkah. We lit the menorah. It was beautiful. What's my favorite part? Honestly, my favorite part of the soccer is watching the people. It's amazing. You see them like tensing up, and then there's somebody just misses the goal. Oh, somebody scores. Hey, This year was unbelievable because the people that we watched the soccer at, everybody there, oh gosh, I've forgotten who was in. It was France and? No. Argentina. Right. So everybody in the house was all Argentina supporters. And I had to go out in the middle. I had to go out in the middle. And I heard that all the staff were watching and they were all supporting France. So by standing outside, I could tell who was doing well in the game, by where the cheering was coming from, right? So all those people who sit in the stadium together and cheer and hug each other when somebody scores a goal, do they have anything to do with each other in real life? Nothing. Right? Nothing. Belev echad, there is something sensational happening that causes them temporarily to be ish echad, temporarily to work in a unified fashion. Egypt as a society was not a unified society. We know that. We know that from the story. We know that there were those in favor of enslaving the Jews and those who begged Pharaoh to let the Jews go. We know that the firstborns rebelled against their parents and there was a civil war over the impending plague of the death of the firstborns because it was a disparate society. They were not a unified group of people. But give them an enemy and they're all unified. It's exactly what Israel prays for, is discord amongst its enemies. Because as long as they're fighting with each other, we're okay. God forbid they look in our direction, they all unite. The Ukrainians, the Polish, the Lithuanians, the Latvians, the Germans have nothing to do with each other until there's a Holocaust. That's belev echad ke'ish echad, where everybody chooses a particular objective and everybody gets behind that objective and has the illusion of unity where there actually is no unity. That's what happens when we try to make our kids get behind the objective of values. These are the values. Belev echad. We all care about the same things, right? Because since you said your first word, we've been telling you these are our values. So we're all behind them, right? Because this is what we've always said. We have our family's motto, our family's mission statement. And we've said it our whole lives. Surely, after so many years of indoctrination, surely you're behind us? Belev echad ki ish echad. We all have one heart and therefore we'll all be one united family. Never works. It can only work in the short term. So if we believe that we're going to meld our family together by virtue of values, forget about it. It can never work. We can never expect that our kids follow what we have decided are their values because we believe that they'll share our heart, which is unpredictable, about those values. So let's go back to the story at Sinai, because that's a success story. Yes, of course, there were other times that there was all kind of conflict and whatever the case is, but that's what's so profound about it. See, anybody who thinks that a family or a community has to be homogeneous in order to be unified doesn't understand unity. That's what Rashi's telling us. There, at Sinai, they felt the unity. The rest of the time, they were squabbling and fighting, whatever, and it didn't undermine their unity. Because there they realized, K'ish echad, we are inherently one. Inherently one means we are one even if you don't subscribe to our values. We're not going to disown you if you rebel. We are ish echad. We're one being, one entity. That's who we are. That means we love each other unconditionally. That means that we respect each other unconditionally. That means that my child will never have to feel the threat of what if one day I challenge my family's values and then they don't want to have anything to do with me anymore. The first thing our kids have to know is K'ish echad. We put us first.
But can you not teach them our values? Can you not show them our values?
K'ish echad. First they have to know we are one entity. Then, belev echad. Then you have a platform on which you can expect them to adopt our values. Not necessarily on our timeline, not necessarily in the way that we expect, because we like everything to be a straight line. It may not be a straight line, it may be all over the place. Just recently, and I have to be careful how I say this not to expose the particular family, but just recently I was talking to an individual who comes from an extremely frum family, and many of the kids are not frum today. And it's very painful for the parents, as you can imagine, that many of the kids, not only are they not observant, but they've really, moved to an extreme. So the family recently was all together for a Shabbos, and they were all singing the nigunim that they grew up with as kids, with the fervor that they had as kids. And this one child turns to the parents and says, "There you see, we K'ish echad. We're still connected. It's such an intrinsic, inherent level that the fact that not everybody's on the same page, that actually doesn't even matter." But if we want belev echad, if we want everybody to share a value set, to be on our page has to be the most attractive page to be on. It has to be the page where you feel the most comfortable, the most loved, the most protected, the most cared for, the most respected as the individual you are. But K'ish echad, we're one person. Yes, one person has many limbs. There's a brain, there's a heart, there's a liver, there's lungs. Everyone operates completely uniquely, and that doesn't undermine the fact of K'ish echad. And that's what Rashi's telling us. It's not that they were on their way to Sinai and therefore they were united. It's that they were united and therefore they could be on their way to Sinai. It's not because we teach a value system to our children and therefore our family is whole. It's because our family is whole that we can dare to teach a value system to our children. And when we get that balance right, magic happens. And when we don't get that balance right, life is incredibly frustrating. I think it's an incredible lesson for us. Incredible lesson. The first and foremost, we are ish echad. First and foremost, we are a single, inherently linked, united, loving unit. And only then do we have a hope of sharing the same values. But if we think we're going to get everybody to love the same values, love is so unpredictable, we probably will feel disappointed. And if our family connection is dependent on those values, then we can have our whole family, God forbid, fall apart. So I think that's a great thing to think about, right? The importance, and it has to be, when people talk about unconditional love, it has to be unconditional love, like absolute unconditional love, which is hard, right? It's not impossible because it's inherent, but it's hard to remember. So, listen, Hashem should bless us all that we are able to have the Ke'ish Echad, that incredible harmony in our families, and as a result, the Lev Echad, that we can have the nachas of shared values.